I don't know how it really happened, but 2024, I guess, is about to be over now. Time keeps moving at a pace that continues to terrify me as it goes on, but at least there's some good movies to distract me until my inevitable demise. And so for this video, I'm going to give you guys my top 10 favorite films of 2024. Obvious disclaimers here. Number one is I did not see every single movie that came out this year. I don't go see every movie. I only go to the ones that appeal to me, the ones that I hear are good, ones that I think I'll like. I try to catch as many in theaters as I can. If I miss them, I try to catch them later on streaming. So I've seen a good chunk of movies this year, but not every single movie. I don't go see movies I know I'm gonna hate, like, Madam Web, and shit, like, just to give the studios more money and more incentive to keep making crappy movies. So I don't go see those. I just see the stuff that I want to see. So those are the only contenders here for the list. The other disclaimer is obviously my list is going to look a lot different than your list. So if I don't give the movie that you like the best ranking, well, just go ahead and put your own top 10 list in the comments and we can see how everyone is feeling about this year. And this is not a ranking on what I think is objectively the best made movie of the year. These are just my personal favorites, the ones that resonated with me the most and the ones that I had the most enjoyment watching, the ones that I've thought about the most. And I think I've come up with my definitive list for the year. So let's get into it, but I'm going to start with a couple honorable mentions because not everything can make it into the top 10, and I did see a lot of movies that I enjoyed this year. So with the honorable mentions, I got to mention Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. I'm a huge Godzilla fan, and I did have a lot of fun with this movie. I thought there's just a ton of great action, spectacle, absurdity to behold, so really enjoyed it. Monkey Man was a smaller budget action film. Dave Patel, I thought he did a great job. I really liked Abigail. It was kind of like a throwback 80s vampire fright night kind of film. Late Night with the Devil, I thought was really great. Essentially, it's filmed in a way as if you're watching a real late night broadcast with a TV host interviewing somebody who is possessed by a demonic entity, which was great. I also really liked the movie Immaculate with Sydney Sweeney. I thought that was a good horror film. I really liked Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and I thought this movie kind of got a little forgotten about over time. And I think the main problem is just that it's not as good as the previous trilogy with Caesar, but it's still really good. It just has that downfall of just not being quite as good as the rest of the movies that we were getting. But now getting into my official top 10 list, at number 10 is the movie Furiosa, directed by George Miller. This is a spin-off slash prequel to the Mad Max films, particularly Mad Max Fury Road, about the character Furiosa that was originally introduced in that movie. And I think a lot of people dismissed this film way too early, considering the fact that Mad Max was not going to be really featured in it, especially not as the main character. I don't think a lot of people realize this is still George Miller. It's still the same director that's made all of the Mad Max films, not just Fury Road, but all of the originals as well. It's still his world, it's still his universe, and the man is nearly in his 80s. He might be in his 80s, and he is creating these insane set pieces and action sequences that are so detailed and so articulate. And no, I don't think they're as good as Fury Road. I think Fury Road is just one of those films that is just this masterpiece of action cinema that came out of nowhere at the time and won't be topped in that way. But Furiosa didn't need to top it to still be good. I still thought it was a great action film just in its own. I liked going back into that world. I liked seeing Immortan Joe again, and Chris Hemsworth as the main antagonist of this film. He was just having a ball. He was having the time of his life. It was great to see him be able to stretch his wings into something that's not Thor and not the Marvel Cinematic Universe and something else that he could do. There's several action sequences in this movie that stick out in my mind, and again, I think the main reason people didn't like this movie is just because Mad Max wasn't the main character, and I can understand that to a degree, but if you take the movie on its own merits, I thought it still holds up incredibly well, especially considering the age of George Miller making it. All the characters that were involved, I thought, put in great performances. I thought the action sequences were great. It did what it needed to do, in my opinion, and I had a lot of fun with it. At my number 9 for the year is going to be a movie called Strange Darling. This movie technically premiered in 2023, but it didn't really come out in theaters or have a wider release until 2024. So I'm counting it as a 2024 movie. So I don't know how in particular you want to get with the definition here. But Strange Darling is one of those movies that you can't really talk about because the whole point of the film is to see how the story unfolds. Essentially, it's this sort of cat and mouse game that is told in a segment of 5 chapters, but the chapters are told out of order. So the movie kind of starts in the middle. I think you start with chapter 3 or something like that. And it keeps you guessing the entire way through as to what is going on, which character is in the right, how it's going to all unfold. And so the process of the unraveling of the story is kind of the main focus of watching the movie. But beyond that, incredible performances all around. Kyle Gallner, who will show up again on this list, just did a great job. And it was one of those films that I think took a lot of people by surprise, myself included. Really, really enjoyed this one. So definitely deserves a spot on the list. At my number 8, another movie that surprised me and another movie with Kyle Gallner is Smile 2. So up until about a month ago, I had not seen either of the Smile movies. I missed the first one when it came out in theaters. I guess, I don't know, the trailers didn't really call out to me when it came out, but everyone said it was amazing. Took me some time, but I finally watched both Smile 1 and Smile 2 this year, and I actually like the second one a lot more. Now, I feel like I am in the minority with that because I'm getting a lot of comments saying that people didn't like the second one and they loved the first one a lot more. But I thought the direction of the second one was way better. I thought they improved on all the concepts that they introduced in the first one. I thought the story was better told. I liked the main character more than the main character in the first one. The opening sequence with Kyle is just insane. That's like its own mini movie just in itself. I really love the finale. I love the repercussions of what that could mean for a potential third movie. I don't know. I really, really enjoyed the second one, and in my personal opinion, I liked it more than the first. At my number 7 is a movie called Azrael, starring Samara Weaving. This movie also took me by surprise. I'd had no idea what it was about. And essentially, it's very low budget, but they work very well with what they have. Essentially, it is like this post-apocalyptic world after the rapture has happened. So obviously the title of the film, Azrael, there's a lot of heavy biblical themes going on here. And I'm not going to claim that I understand them all since I'm not a very religious person myself. But I love the idea of what's happening here, where these remnants of people left on Earth are kind of like these burned, scarred, zombie-like creatures that the main character has to try to avoid. But there's 2 great things about this movie that really kept me captivated as I was watching it. The first thing is, the whole movie is essentially a chase sequence. So there's this cult of humans that are still existing after the rapture, and they are after the main character, but you don't really know why. So you're kind of watching this unfold, and at the same time, there's pretty much no dialogue in this movie. It's a silent film. The characters don't talk, except for one sequence that is very, very strange that I'm still not able to put together in my mind. I've only seen it one time, but there's pretty much no dialogue here. So it reminded me of a movie like Valhalla Rising or something like that, where you have a main character that doesn't speak and you don't really have any dialogue in the film, and you're told the entire story just through watching the actions unfold. So it leaves you a lot of potential as the viewer to kind of try to put the pieces together and try to understand the story the best that you can without it being outright told to you in a bunch of exposition. You're just kind of watching events happen and figuring it out all together. And I don't even think I figured it all out, but I was captivated by this movie. I was extremely entertained. It's got a lot of horrific sequences, including the burned kind of demonic characters. And I don't know, it was the kind of movie that I wasn't expecting, but I guess I needed at the time. At my number 6 for the year is going to be the movie Longlegs with Micah Monroe, and of course, the legendary Nicolas Cage. This was one of those films, as others on my list will be, that was extremely divisive. You have a handful of people that thought this film was incredible, and then you also have a handful of people that thought it was overrated and trash, and they didn't like Nicolas Cage's performance, and that's a lot of what it comes down to for me, is that you have to buy into his performance as Longlegs, which is admittedly ridiculous, but it worked for me. But the biggest thing for me about many films is atmosphere, right? I need to feel this sense of dread that you're trying to put on the screen. I need to feel a sense of unease. I need to feel essentially the presence of evil, the presence of darkness when you're making a horror film like this, and Longlegs worked for me in that regard. The only thing I don't like about the movie is the final scene. I thought it kind of ends on a whimper, where the movie kept building and building and building and building. I really wanted a better climax, but essentially the final scene of the movie is just kind of okay. It doesn't give me enough, so that's why it's number 6 and I didn't put it up higher. But I would say for about 80% of this movie, I absolutely loved it. And if it would have nailed the ending, I probably would have put it up higher. But as of right now, it's my number 6. All right, now getting into the best of the best, in my opinion, my top 5 favorite movies of the year. At number 5, it is Terrifier 3. The Terrifier films are not for everybody, but if you can get into the over-the-top, ridiculous violence of them and the absurdity on the screen, then they can become a lot of fun. But also, as the films go on, I thought Terrifier 2 is still my favorite of the Terrifier films, but 3 is pretty close. 3 gives you all of the gore and violence and kills that you want, but it also expands on the story even more. It expands on the lore. As these films start going or continue to go, you get more and more information about Art the Clown and the demonic entities therein. I loved how they continued the story of Sienna Shaw, Lauren Lavera's character, and her brother, brought her back because she essentially is our main character of the Terrifier franchise, even though she wasn't introduced until part 2. I think she does a great job portraying a character, like in a movie that is as crazy and ridiculous as Terrifier is. She really brings a grounded sensibility to the movie, kind of acting how somebody would act if they have gone through some horrific traumatic circumstance, and now people are looking at them differently. People know about their story. People want to profit off of them, bringing them on their podcast. Her brother is trying to get away from the traumatic events that have happened in part 2, do something different with his life, and then she's still kind of focused and obsessed over it. And then in the midst of that, you have this parallel storyline of Art the Clown going about his daily adventures, during the Christmas season, meeting this Santa Claus character, which was my favorite scene of the movie. And if you're a slasher fan and you love these over-the-top kill sequences, dear God, the shower scene, the stuff with Santa, the one with the rats was the one that affected me the most. That was just absolutely disgusting, but in the best way possible. So Terrifier 3, also a great film for the horror genre in general, being this unrated film that somehow, against all odds, has now become popular enough that it made so much money compared to its budget. It was this sort of mainstream horror film that had pretty much no marketing, unrated, maybe hard to find depending on where you lived, and yet somehow, against all odds, it managed to persevere. So just the behind the scenes aspect of what it means for independent filmmaking and all of that is also very impressive to me. At my number 4 spot, I'm going to put Alien Romulus. So I'm a huge fan of the Alien franchise, and although I desperately wanted a continuation of where Prometheus and Covenant and the David storyline was going, when I heard that Fede Alvarez was going to direct an Alien film, I did get excited because the Evil Dead remake is one of those films that absolutely surprised me. I never wanted an Evil Dead remake, but he did such a great job. Whether you want to technically call it a remake or not, that's up to you. But I was supportive of the director. I felt like he knew what he was doing. He was bringing the series back to its horror roots. He was trying to make it scary again, but he was also trying to blend a little bit of Alien and Aliens. And although there are things in this movie that I don't like, there's a couple callbacks and references and kind of fan servicey moments that don't particularly work for me, and I do have issues with it. However, overall, I really enjoyed it, and every time I watch it, I like it more. I've watched it about 3 times now, and I like it more every time, so it's a movie that is growing on me as time goes on. I do love the dynamic between Rain and Andy. I also think some of the horror sequences in here were fantastic, particularly the one that he did with the face huggers. Sometimes in these movies, you don't spend enough time with just how terrifying and horrific the face huggers can actually be, so we spent some time with that. The practical effects that were used in the movie, and particularly the final sequence, the final 10 minutes of the film, this is, again, one of those things that is very divisive. A lot of people didn't like this, but for me, this is what made the movie. You know, we incorporated some different lore, some expansion on things that have happened before. We created a new terrifying entity to behold, and holy crap, I thought the last 10 minutes of this movie were amazing. I thought it was terrifying, suspenseful, something I didn't expect, and just really kind of struck the landing for me. I hope moving forward in the Alien series that we do get at least a little bit of an understanding of what happened with the David character from Covenant. I know that there's also a split in the Alien franchise. There's a lot of splits in the Alien fan community, you know. There's some people that only like the first two. There's some people that only like the Ridley Scott movies. There's some people that, you know, it's all over the place, really. I love most of it, except for, you know, and even the ones I don't like, whatever, you know what I mean? But anyways, I hope moving forward, even if Fede Alvarez does another one, or if we continue the Rain storyline, we at least get a little bit of a conclusion of what happened with David. But beyond that, yeah, Alien Romulus is a movie to me that is getting better upon rewatches, and there's a lot of things I respect about it, and I think the pros definitely outweigh the cons for me. Okay, now it's getting serious. Now we're getting down to my top 3 favorite movies of the year, and honestly, this was extremely difficult because I think you could swap these out for almost any order. At this point, the order is kind of irrelevant. Like, I don't feel right putting any of these movies at number 3. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like these are all just fantastic films that I absolutely loved, but ultimately we have to come up with some kind of ranking, so I'll try to justify my choices. At number 3, I'm going to put Nosferatu. Nosferatu is a film that I'd been looking forward to since it was first announced. I love the original silent film from 1922. I actually think it is one of the best movies ever made, just bar none, even outside of my own opinions. And Robert Eggers, the guy that has the intense visual style that he showed with The Northman, The Witch, that he was going to be the one taking the reins and doing a remake of this movie. The cast was incredible, and watching it, it gave me exactly what I was needing and what I was hoping for from a Nosferatu remake, in the sense that it does honor and respect the original, but it does do enough to create its own identity. But even more than that, it gives you the kind of terror that I really wanted from this character. Of course, this is based on the original Dracula. You know, Count Orlok is essentially Dracula. It's essentially the Dracula story. But with that, I wanted Count Orlok to be more than just a singular physical threat, but something that really brings this presence of darkness and evil with him. He is like a plague, as he brings the plague of rats with him. He is this window into your darkest desires and your darkest obsessions. You know, he is something that represents that evil that is out there in the world, but also within us. So it's like when he is around you, you're disoriented, you're confused, you're hypnotized. It is this whole presence of this character, more so than just like, oh, it's a vampire. This really shows the power, the strength, the thrall of what I want vampires, but more particularly what I want Dracula to be. And since it was able to capture that perfectly, that's what made this movie a win for me. Now, on top of that, you have the incredible cinematography. You have Lily Rose Depp that's channeling the movie Possession in some of her performance. You have the other characters that were all great. Willem Dafoe. In my actual review, I forgot to mention Aaron Taylor Johnson, and a lot of people are saying online that he wasn't good in the movie, and I completely disagree. He just was the character that had to play like the straight man. You know, he was the person that didn't believe in what was happening. So he's so much more reserved, so much more normal than the other characters. But in that performance of having to be the normal guy, he still did a great job. Everything in this movie was amazing, and I can't wait to watch it again. I know it's not working for some people. Some people say it was boring. I don't know. To me, I was enthralled the entire way. I didn't feel the runtime at all. This was exactly the kind of movie I wanted, which makes me so upset that I put it at number 3 instead of number 2 or number 1. But I have reasons for this. So my number 2 favorite movie of the year is a movie that absolutely surprised me. I was not expecting. It was not on my radar at all, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it since, and it is The Substance with Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. This is a horror film that is absolutely absurd, but also talks about some deep, painful psychological issues that I think, now the movie is very focused from a female perspective, but I think everybody can understand it to some degree with how we feel about ourselves, with how we feel about aging, and how we wish we could be, or maybe how we wish we could still be, and also the way that we're viewed by society, by people around us, by people in the business. But the basic premise is Demi Moore is this aging actress, pop star, that is now instructing fitness videos, and she's kind of being pushed out of the limelight, but she finds a product called The Substance that if she injects herself with it, it creates a quote-unquote better version of herself, in which, and you have to be on board with the concept because it is crazy, essentially a younger, hotter version of her rips out of her body and becomes the new her. But it can only be sustained for a certain amount of time, and she has to go back into her older body. But the longer that she spends in the younger body, the more that her older body starts to age and wither. She has to keep swapping back and forth. And so what we ultimately invest ourselves in is this character that is kind of split between two personas, and both of them are completely at odds with one another. But it's, outside of the literal story that we're watching, it's essentially how we kind of view ourselves, right? Like our worst aspects, our best aspects, how we hate ourselves, how we wish we could look, how we desire that youth and longevity, and also how we self-sabotage ourselves times and times again. But not only that, it's also the visual style of this movie. I thought it was filmed incredibly well. It very much is like a fantasy world. It reminded me of like Reanimator mixed with the Neon Demon and, maybe some Stanley Kubrick shit thrown in there too. The performances were incredible. But also the thing about this film is that I never expected it to go as hard as it goes. There are so many moments where I thought the film was at the end, and I was like, it can't get any crazier than this. And then it gets crazier. And then it gets crazier than that. And you think, okay, that's got to be the end of the movie. And not in a way where, like, you're waiting for it to end, but just because what is happening is so fucking ridiculous, you're like, there's no way they can get even crazier than that. And then they do it again. I cannot believe the ending of this movie, and that this was a mainstream film starring Demi Moore that came out in theaters that is actually getting quite a high amount of recognition. Like, this is the kind of shit that, like, I would imagine fans of, Reanimator or Evil Dead or The Thing, or The Fly, like that's that kind of fan base. But it's getting kind of more of a mainstream appeal, which is blowing my mind. But maybe that's just a testament to how good this film is. So, yes, it is at my number 2. And the reason I put it above Nosferatu for me is because, one, I got to give it up to the originality of the movie, because as much as I love Nosferatu, at the end of the day, it is a remake, technically. This was completely fresh, completely original, and it also is the movie that surprised me the most this year. It is the movie that completely took me off guard and was something I was not expecting to love, and I did love it. But that being said, I do have one movie that still topped it, in my opinion, for my favorite film of the year, and that is Dune Part 2. Now, maybe some people have forgotten because Dune came out way back in March, but I really do think these new Dune movies, Part 1 and Part 2, and by the way, so many people are calling Dune Part 2 a sequel, and I understand it from the technical sense, but it's not really a sequel. It literally is Part 2. Both movies, Dune Part 1 and Part 2, are based on one singular book. The first Dune book is Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2. So you don't get a complete story if you watch either of the films. It literally is one story. So you kind of have to watch Dune 1 and 2 back to back to get the full effect. And, the reason they split it into 2 was, budget reasons. And also, like, then you'd be watching like a 5.5, 6 hour movie if it was all together. So it's hard for me to consider it a sequel because it's literally just the second half of one story. But Anyway, technicalities aside, I think this is an incredible masterpiece of sci-fi cinema that will stand the test of time. It's definitely the best adaptation of the story. It inspired me to read the entire Frank Herbert Dune series, of which case I'm on the last one, Chapter House Dune now. This movie really made me feel like I was watching something epic. It gave me the kind of feeling that I haven't had in a really long time, especially with a science fiction story. But there's also a lot of depth to it. You know, it's not just good guys versus bad guys. I think the thing that I love about Dune, as well as a lot of the other stories that I love, are when you showcase characters that have this sort of complexity to the point where, just like real life, when a lot of things break out, you know, there's no set standard of good guys and bad guys. It's all about people trying to accomplish different things. And maybe in one case, you can utilize your significant place in the world to propel yourself to do something that is very personal to you at perhaps the expense of those around you. You know, it's a complicated thing because there's a lot of justification for what Paul is doing, but at the same time, there is horrendous repercussions that will become of it. The performances all around are great. You have Austin Butler in there as Fade Routha. Some people think he goes over the top, and yeah, to some extent, yes, but it's a lot of fun nonetheless. Then talking about like the set design and the cinematography and the way that this film looks, I love how everything, the black and white of the Harkonnen planet, the Hans Zimmer score coming in where Paul decides to really kind of take up this mantle of being this Lisan Agaib and what they believe in, as well as leading to our final sequence face-to-face with the Emperor and everything that happens there. The tragedy, I guess you want to call it, the simultaneous rise and fall of Paul Atreides, and all the other characters too that don't get enough credit. Rebecca Ferguson as his mom, as well as Javier Bardem. All of the actors really put in 100% effort, and it really is this incredible adaptation of one of the best sci-fi novels ever written that so many other stories have drawn from over the years, and it's crazy to see it really have this kind of respect from the director. And I know that they did change things. You know, there are some omissions after reading the book. You know, there are some things that I wish were in the movie that they didn't do, or maybe some things that were too silly that they didn't want to do, like with Alia. But you know, and I would have preferred those things in there, but just taken on its own merits. And I understand that when you adapt something, it's always going to change. It's always going to be different. You know, the movie versions, the TV versions, they're all going to be different than the actual books. So, you know, it can't be a 1-to-1, 100% recreation. But for what they did in the movies, I thought this film worked on all levels, from the acting to the directing, the storytelling, the score, and just the immersion that I felt. Once again, it's all about atmosphere for me. If a movie can really make me feel something, because, you know, as I get older, it's just harder and harder to do that, right? It's just harder and harder to actually feel something or connect to something. And after you watch so many movies and so many stories, there's so many movies you can be like, yeah, that was good, I enjoyed it. But with these top three for me, Nosferatu, The Substance, and Dune Part 2, all three of those, regardless of what order you want to put them in, they all actually got emotions out of me. They all actually made me feel something, and I felt like I was immersed into these worlds. And that is a true testament of filmmaking, in my opinion. So there you have it, guys. Those are my top 10 favorite movies of the year. Once again, these are personal favorite, not necessarily what I think are the best made films objectively, but my personal favorite. So put your personal ranking down below. What were your top 10, top 5? What kind of movies did you like this year? And let me know your thoughts down below, guys. So yeah, as always, thanks for watching. Can't believe we're at the end of 2024. Next year, I do want to try to make it a priority to do more new movie reviews as they come out. Once again, I'm not going to go see every single movie, but I'm going to try to see as many that appeal to me as I can and give you guys more frequent, more consistent new movie reviews, even if I have to do it once they come to streaming, because sometimes my theaters around here just don't get certain movies. So even if I have to do it that way, I will. So thanks again for watching, guys. Please give the video a thumbs up and a comment to help it out in the algorithm. Thanks as always, and I'll talk to you next time.